What is up, guys? Dzeeff here, and today we are doing a Duel Links discussion video. There will be some gameplay in the background from my latest King of Games run, but I mostly just want to talk about the current Duel Links format and my opinions on it, because, you know, it's been a while since we've done an actual sit-down Duel Links video. I know I just posted like a duel replay from a live stream a couple days ago, but it's been a while since we actually sat down and had a conversation about Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links and where it's at. So, first off, I think that before the Koa'ki Meiru set was introduced to Duel Links, the format was in an excellent spot. There was like a solid 2 months where there were tons of different decks that were viable, and it felt like all the games, for the most part, outside of Mass Heroes drawing Mass Change every single game, for the most part though, games were back and forth. You got to see counterplay, you got to see cool combos happening, you got to see control decks be good, OTK decks be good. I felt like the game was in a good spot. I know a lot of people complain about Blue Eyes, but I don't think the deck was nearly as good as people made it out to be. There were simply too many counters to that deck, and it was too inconsistent. Oftentimes with the Blue Eyes deck, and just most decks like that, I mean, Koa'ki Meiru are kind of the same way. As long as you can survive or stop the initial sort of attack that they're trying to do, their initial combo, you usually can just outlast those decks. I think that's really cool that you can play sort of these control strategies that have good matchups against those OTK strategies, and I really liked how the format was turning out. This was after the Amazoness hits, after the For Hire hits. I felt that this was the way that Duel Links was meant to be played. A ton of viable decks, a ton of viable characters. We hadn't really seen that prior to that, because I mean, right before that, right, you have Cyber Style at every single player. Like 80% of the player base is using Cyber Style for every single deck, no matter if it's control or OTK or whatever. But I felt like after Cyber Style got nerfed, I felt like after like Treacherous Trap Hole got hit, and you had Hey Trunade getting hit, they finally hit SRs from packs. I felt like Duel Links was in such a good spot, and I even posted like a video saying it was a good spot. I even posted on Twitter about it being a good spot, and then it kind of went off the deep end. So it wasn't necessarily the introduction of synchros, because that was fine for the most part. And I mean, if we're being completely honest here, synchros aren't seen play, right? I mean, people keep telling me in the comments, oh, they're seen play like in Blue Eyes. Not really though anymore. Blue Eyes decks are mostly just not playing any tuners, which is kind of crazy to think about. A lot of times they're just playing cards like Breaker or Destructotron instead of using tuners, because they just want to blow up back row. And Blue Eyes never was like a true synchro deck to me. They only made the synchro plays when they had enough resources to do so. In general, the Blue Eyes deck just wanted to OTK you with Cosmo Brain and Blue Eyes and stuff like that. They never really wanted to synchro summon. It was just sort of their backup play when they drew the right hand to do so. But nowadays, they're not even playing synchros, because they're not even playing tuner monsters for the most part. And I think that's a big deal, because without Blue Eyes playing tuner monsters, there's pretty much no solid like meta contenders that are playing tuners. There is like the Junk Synchron control deck, but really that's just like an Armades deck, and really it's just like a control deck that doesn't really focus on synchro summoning. There's nothing like we saw when synchros got introduced to TCG, where we have like Teledad and things like that, where you're synchro summoning every single turn, multiple monsters. That's just not in Duel Links right now. The only deck that's synchro summoning is that Junk Synchron deck, but for the most part, it's just like 1,000 trap cards and Junk Synchron and Breaker and stuff like that. It's not really a true synchro summoning deck. It's just summon Armades. And then we had like a little bit of Dragoonity. People were playing those as like a rogue deck, and that deck had some cool OTKs, but it wasn't really a meta contender. It was a little bit too inconsistent for that. Obviously, they don't have Dragon's Ravine in this game, and that card is incredibly good in Dragoonities, but so far, I've just been so underwhelmed with every single synchro deck that's come out. I really thought that like Karakuris or Fableds would really make synchro summoning good. We played a couple Karakuris on this King of Games run, but nothing that like really impressed me. They all seem to just be really reliant on that normal summon. There simply aren't enough extenders in Duel Links for synchro decks to be good, and that's a real shame, because synchro summoning is a really cool summoning mechanic. It's one that a lot of people at this point have stopped complaining about. I mean, there's still people, you'll always find people are just like, oh, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was better before synchro summoning, but for the most part, I feel like when people are saying that kind of stuff, they're now talking about pendulums or link summoning, not so much synchro summoning, not so much Xyz summoning. So I think Konami really could make good synchro cards and good synchro strategies. They're just sort of refusing to do that. I actually thought that Fableds would be really good, but they turned out to kind of flop. I think that the deck is too expensive for enough experimentation to actually happen, but it's probably just not good enough, because there's just not good enough synchro monsters in this game. It's not good enough non-tuners and tuners to actually facilitate the synchro summons. They're just in a really weird spot, and that's pretty disappointing, because synchro summoning, like I said, is cool, and I think a lot of people would be excited to play good synchro decks. They're just not out there. Yes, if you want to play Armades, you can play Junk Synchron with the Kiza ability, and you can summon Armades every game, but if you wanted to do like an actual synchro toolbox deck, it just doesn't can't exist at the higher ranks outside of like a couple players, and they're not that successful even when people are using those types of decks. But all of this doesn't really matter. I'm not necessarily just complaining about Koa'ki Meiru in this video, because I actually like Koa'ki Meiru. I think it's a cool strategy. I think it's cool that they gave them like a new card. Well, I mean, they're all old cards in Duel Links, but they gave them like a new wave of support versus the initial wave that we got, which was with Urnite and Iron Core and stuff like that. I think that's really neat. I think it's cool to have a deck like that in the metagame. I also think it's interesting the fact that like Koa'ki Meiru in Duel Links is so reliant on Diamond Core, because there simply aren't enough cards to like actually reveal for the Koa'ki Meirus, because it's not as Beast Warrior focused. You don't even play Crusader, which is really interesting. But the Koa'ki Meiru deck, what it did to the metagame, I think is where I was feeling really bad about Duel Links. I even posted on Twitter that I just had no desire to play Duel Links, and that was something that I hadn't felt for months now. And I don't know if it's because like the TCG format is so good right now. I'm really having a lot of fun playing Altergeist against the metagame and things like that, although Altergeist are kind of meta right now. But the Duel Links metagame just felt so stale. I think the problem with it was that even if you weren't playing against Koa'ki Meiru every single round, because I don't think I mean, maybe when they were first revealed, a lot of people were playing them. I think by the time that I was getting King of Games, a lot of people, maybe the Koa'ki Meirus already got to King of Games or something along those lines. But a lot of the Koa'ki Meiru players were playing just these really heavy like OTK based strategies. They're just basically doing the same thing every single game. They're just beating you on the first turn, or they're bricking and you're just OTKing them. And this is where the problem, at least that I found, was in the Duel Links format. It seemed like everyone was just trying to win on the very first turn, and that's not what Duel Links is about. That's not even what the TCG is about, although a lot of Duel Links players probably think it is about that. But even in the TCG, you have back and forth gameplay. When you play against like Sky Strikers and you're playing another control deck, you have a lot of back and forth. It's good. It lets like players actually make skillful decisions. I think that's really cool. But then you go over to Duel Links, and it's like, even if they're not playing Koa'ki Meiru, they're playing a deck that beats Koa'ki Meiru, and the decks that beat Koa'ki Meiru are other OTK based strategies, and that really makes it a coin toss, right? Because the Koa'ki Meiru deck doesn't have a lot of plays going first, so then you just like pass, or maybe you set like one trap card, and then your opponent is playing Koa'ki Meirus or a similar OTK based strategy, and then they just OTK you. It didn't feel like a lot of meaningful interactions were made. Most games were ended on the second turn, the first that you were available to attack, and I just didn't have fun doing that. It wasn't very cool to me. I really missed like the old back and forth gameplay, and that's when I found Vampire Crimson. I think Vampire Crimson is really what changed my mind about this particular format, at least from me as a player. Now, if you don't want to play vampires, I don't know what you do. I mean, you can play like a deck like the Armades deck, like the Breaker deck, where you just set 3 back row, and that's a pretty good counter to a lot of the OTK based strategies out there. Blue Eyes actually does better at dealing with back row than Koa'ki Meiru, interestingly enough. But what I like so much about vampires is that every single game, no matter what happens, even if you open like the major consistency cards like Samurai Skull or Gozuki, which I finally spent one of my tickets on, I really feel like there's a ton of meaningful decisions that happen throughout the match. And the reason that this happens, by the way, is that anytime that you have a deck with a ton of searches in it, in this case, you can search any vampire spell or trap card or any vampire monster, depending on which card you're using. And I think that anytime that you have searchers in a deck, it adds more decision making to the player, and that's good. That promotes skillful interactions, and that's why I like vampires so much. I felt like every single game I was making decisions, I was outplaying my opponents, I was making the right searches at the right time, and that's why I liked vampires versus Koa'ki Meiru, which is, I mean, it seemed like every single game I was doing the exact same thing. I played that deck for like one day, I won a lot of games, and I lost some games, but it just wasn't fun. It wasn't meaningful to me to just summon Urnite every game and summon Maximus any game. And yeah, I'm sure people that haven't played vampires or that hate vampires because they're a meta deck, they might say things like, oh, well, in this deck, you're just summoning Samurai Skull every turn, you're summoning Vampire Grace every turn. And while I get where you're coming from, when you look at the play patterns of vampire duelists, even though, I mean, you've seen some of the gameplay in the background of this video versus the play patterns of Koa'ki Meiru, I think you start to realize that vampires have a ton of options at their disposal. Lots of times you'll win without even tribute summoning any monsters at all. You just use the little guys. There's so many different ways to take advantage of vampires versus Koa'ki Meirus, where, don't get me wrong, Koa'ki Meirus are very strong, but they just weren't versatile. They just weren't interesting. It seemed like every single game was the exact same thing. I was either OTKing my opponent on the first turn with Urnite and Maximus, or I was losing on the first turn because my opponent OTK'd me. It just wasn't fun. It's not why I play Yu-Gi-Oh! I play Yu-Gi-Oh! For back and forth gameplay, and that's especially when you're playing Duel Links, where you think that it's sort of like old school Yu-Gi-Oh! In some way, shape, or form. I mean, it's at this point it's more like 2010, 2011 Yu-Gi-Oh! But still, it's back and forth. You have meaningful decisions to make throughout the match, and that's what I want out of Duel Links, and I felt like I wasn't getting that. So Vampire Crimson was a card that I put in, and it's just like, even if this card isn't being summoned every game, it at the very least can be summoned against the OTK decks to give me a chance to come back and have some meaningful gameplay, and that's what I felt like was missing from Duel Links in the Vampire deck in general. So Duel Links right now, it's just in a weird spot. I feel like there's too many OTK based decks out there. I don't know if this is a result of semi-limiting Treacherous Trap Hole. It's possible, but on the other hand, they did semi-limit Hey Trunade, so back row is a lot better against these decks. Obviously, Koa'ki Meiru and Blue Eyes have a lot of ways to actually push through back row, but for the most part, if you set 3 trap cards, your opponent won't be able to deal with all of them, probably just 2 of them, and then hopefully you can mount a comeback. But I just want to see going forward in Duel Links to get it out of this sort of interesting spot that it's in. I want to see more control decks. I want to see more cards that aren't just combo based, aren't just OTK based. I think that there should be a good variety of decks in the metagame if you're playing Duel Links, and that's what people go to Duel Links for. That's what I go to Duel Links for, so I just want to see more of that going forward. But yeah, this is a deck that I got to King Games with. I'm sure you guys have seen me on live streams playing this or seen some of the gameplay that I posted. I really do like Vampires. I felt that Gozuki was like a pretty big difference maker. I know I got to King Games this deck like twice already without Gozuki. I felt like now is like the finally time to play it. I'm still playing Simultaneous Lost. It's a more than 20 card deck. I don't have a good reason for that. I just really like that card. It's like a versatile piece of spot removal. Once again, just another card that you can tech to sort of be a variety of matchups that a lot of people aren't playing this deck. It's just my own personal tech option that I really feel helps out in a lot of rogue matchups. Anyway though, hope you guys enjoyed today's Duel Links discussion video. It's going to be posted as a bonus video, so there'll be a normal video posted earlier today, but I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.